I didn't realize how quietly a hierarchy can grow inside a family. It doesn't announce itself. It arranges seating. It edits introductions. It decides whose career requires explanation and whose requires applause. When I married Daniel, my sister Clara hugged me and said, "At least you'll have fresh vegetables forever." She meant it kindly. That was the skill kindness, sharp enough to leave a mark without drawing blood. Clara married Evan 2 years before me. "Finance," she would say, as if that single word contained oxygen the rest of us borrowed. He spoke in forecasts and percentages at dinner. My parents listened with visible relief, as if his vocabulary alone ensured their retirement. Daniel didn't compete. He described rainfall patterns, soil rotation, water rights. My mother nodded politely. My father changed the subject. I told myself none of it mattered. We lived on the land Daniel worked, rolling acreage that had been in his family for generations. It wasn't glamorous, it was deliberate. He rose before sunrise without complaint. He studied agricultural policy at night. He kept files in labeled binders, precise and quiet. I admired that about him. Sometimes I mistook it for softness. Clara's life glittered in comparison. The condo downtown, the investment dinners, the way she said portfolio like it was a moral achievement. At family gatherings she'd ask, "So how's farm life?" with a tilt of curiosity that sounded like anthropology. Evan would explain emerging markets while Daniel listened, hands folded loosely, asking careful questions no one noticed were sharper than they seemed. I stayed silent. I thought peace was maturity. The first crack appeared as inconvenience. Evan missed a dinner, then another. Clara started checking her phone mid-conversation. Words like temporary liquidity issue entered the room. My father began asking Evan questions instead of admiring him. My mother stopped repeating his advice to her friends. Then one evening, Clara arrived alone. She didn't mock that night. She didn't perform. She looked smaller, like someone who had been standing on tiptoe too long. "It's complicated," she said. It wasn't complicated. The investments had collapsed. Risk had been dressed as brilliance. Leverage had been mistaken for intelligence. Their savings were locked in structures, unraveling faster than anyone predicted. I felt something I didn't expect: protectiveness. Not superiority, just the instinct to shield someone who suddenly looked human again. For weeks, the calls stretched late into the night. My parents whispered in the kitchen. Numbers were scribbled and erased. Then one Sunday, my father asked Daniel and me to come over. The tone was careful, formal. We sat at the dining table where Clara's wedding toast had once floated so confidently. Papers were spread out: statements, loan summaries, projections. My mother avoided my eyes. "We're family," my father began. "We help each other." "Of course we do," I thought. He cleared his throat. "If you sold the land, just part of it, would stabilize things. Clara and Evan could rebuild. It would only be temporary." Only temporary. I looked at Clara. She didn't meet my gaze. No one asked Daniel directly. They spoke around him, as if the land were an accessory I wore. "It's in your name," my mother added softly. "You've always been generous." I felt the old reflex rise: compliance disguised as loyalty, the instinct to absorb impact so the structure stays upright. Daniel hadn't spoken yet. He was reading the documents on the table. Not theirs, ours. A small folder he had brought without being asked. He placed it down carefully. "I think there's some confusion," he said, voice even. "No edge, no anger." My father frowned. "About what?" "About ownership." He slid a document forward. Not dramatically, just enough for everyone to see the header. "Before we married," he continued, "I placed the land into a conservation trust. It protects the acreage from being fragmented or sold for non-agricultural development. It also limits liquidation for private debt." Silence. Clara blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Daniel said, "the land cannot be sold to cover investment losses. Not mine. Not anyone's." My mother's hand stilled against her coffee cup. My father leaned forward, scanning the page. The words were unambiguous. Legal language tends to be. The trust structure had been established years ago. I was a beneficiary of residence and shared income, not an owner with authority to sell. "You never mentioned this," my father said. "No one asked," Daniel replied gently. There was no triumph in his tone, only fact. I felt heat rise in my chest, not shame, not pride. Recognition, all those dinners, all those raised eyebrows. They had assumed simplicity where there had been strategy. They had mistaken silence for ignorance. Clara looked at me then, really looked. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a rustic alternative, just as a person whose life she had not bothered to understand. "So there's nothing you can do?" she asked. Daniel didn't flinch. "I can offer advice. I can review restructuring options, but the land isn't leverage." The hierarchy collapsed quietly, not because we rose above them, because the structure they relied on had been built on assumption. My father sat back slowly. The air in the room felt thinner. No one apologized. No one accused. The request dissolved on its own weight. In the weeks that followed, my parents tightened their expenses. Clara and Evan negotiated with creditors. The outcome wasn't glamorous. It wasn't catastrophic either. Just constrained. Family dinners resumed, altered. Evan spoke less. Daniel still asked careful questions. This time my father listened to him. Clara no longer teased. She also didn't confess regret. Some distances remain unaddressed. I realized something I hadn't before. Dignity doesn't arrive in confrontation. It arrives in clarity. I hadn't married beneath me. I had married someone who understood preservation of land, of risk, of self-respect. The land still stretches behind our house, winter soil resting under pale light. It was never mine to trade for approval. And for the first time, I don't feel the need to prove that.